Hi and welcome to this episode of ICMA Education and Training presents Let's Talk Markets. I'm here this morning with Eila Kreivi, who is a former EIB representative and now also is part of ICMA's board. Very pleased to say. Good morning, Eila.
Good morning, Simone, and thank you for the invitation.
And Eila, we should actually have had a glass of champagne because we're celebrating the 10-year anniversary of the Green Bond Principles, aren't we, this year?
I agree. It's maybe just a bit early for that, so let's have that later on.
Indeed, indeed. But that's also part of why we're here and what we're going to talk about. You were obviously instrumental in that. As I just said, you were with the EIB until very recently. And back then, 2007, the EIB was the first one to issue a green bond, a climate awareness bond was called, followed by the World Bank. But then it wasn't really until 2014 that the principles have been developed and the market really took off. So tell me a little bit about your time at the EIB, maybe how did you get into developing the first green bond and why did the market then come together to develop the green bond principles?
I try to keep this fairly short, otherwise we will sit here for a long time. But for EIB, the background was really about the European Union policies, because back in 2007, the European Union decided to put the fight against climate change among their priorities. And they asked EIB to step up its lending in this area. And then in the capital markets, the thought was born that maybe we should do something also to mark this change. And so the idea of this green bond, which we call climate awareness bonds for many historical reasons, was born. And actually we tested at the same time another feature. There was a new prospectus directive at that time, passporting your prospectus among the different countries. We tested that as well. And actually we had no clue which one of the features would take off. It was the green bond feature which took off. But as you said, it remained a fairly small market dominated by a small number of MDBs until 2013. And then we had, there was a first institutional sized deal, 1 billion green bond, $1 billion US. And at the same time we saw cities and also corporates started to come to this market. So it clearly started to take off from its root of a pure MDB product. It was something that the investors were interested in finally, and they obviously wanted larger size. They wanted more than 2-3 names, and I think that also provided the background. It was in the air at that time very much to go greener.
And at the time, was it easy for banks to come together and agree on principles?
Well, I have said in many contexts that to me the idea of establishing the green bond principles back then, it was revolutionary in a way, because you had this initiative came from the investment bankers, who are usually fighting and competing tooth and nail, but they had the good idea of getting together and say that this market is growing very, very, very rapidly. We need to put in some recommendations, at least for best practices. And they called a number of issuers, the usual suspects in this space. We were one of them. And then they also got some investors in this space involved. So I thought this idea of getting a platform where you have major banks, major issuers, major investors working together on a totally voluntary basis for best practices, to me that is still something that I haven't really seen anything alike.
Quite revolutionary, and obviously to this day.
Yes.
And back then ICMA was honored to be asked to provide the secretariat, so we have been providing that role since 2014.
Yes.
And also since then, it has continued basically with the market developing the principles. As we always say, they're so successful because they're created by the market, for the market. Indeed. You have also been an active member, continued as part of the ExCom of the Principles Executive Committee. And tell us a little bit about what followed the Green Bond Principles, because obviously since then we've not only seen those principles developing, we've also seen other principles developing on social and sustainability and so on.
To go back to this, I think it's the people around the table at that time. We saw it very quickly that this has to be run more professionally than just among a small number of people, because when you got a number of people around the table, some are always more active than others. And we saw that we need to have somebody who is taking care of them, and ICMA then offered to take care of the secretariat, which was gratefully accepted. And I think it has been a great cooperation ever since. Nowadays I think it's called even ICMA principles. And then we developed the kind of governance and everything, and I was asked to chair for the first 3 years, which I was really happy to take up, because it was a very important time in the development of this market. But then, as you said, indeed, I think it was only very shortly afterwards we started to hear from people that, well, what about, for example, social purposes? Are they not as worthy as climate and environmental purposes? And yes, of course they are. And then there was the social bond principles, which were written, I don't remember the year now, but they were according to the same concept as the green bond principles, i.e. the same pillars, but obviously different use of proceeds, different indicators, and different reporting models. From then it has been easy to sort of develop, I would say, subcategories, like we have had blue bonds, etc. It sounds a bit funny when you say that the blue is a subcategory of green, but that is in a way what it is, because green is encompassing everything environmental. Of course, water and oceans and rivers are part of that. So the blue bonds they have a more specific use of proceeds than just wide green, which can be climate and water and circular economy, whatever you want. Yeah. I think it's a healthy one that people are developing these principles, that you want to specify more in these and these areas, because you may need more details, more sort of specification for certain areas, and that is fine. And all these sectors have developed. Social bonds have gone a bit up and then down. Obviously, during the pandemic, for quite obvious and understandable reasons, they went up, shooting up very quickly. It has calmed down a little bit since then. I think it's more a question of having a huge base in the pandemic period rather than anything else. To me, it's a clear market trend now. It's mainstreaming, even though you still have people who say that, well, this is only X% of the total bonds outstanding, but that's a bit doesn't really mean much, because if you compare anything to JGBs or US Treasuries, well, anything looks small. So even covered bond markets would look very small if you compare to US Treasuries. So that's not really the comparison, but it is also creeping into mainstream bonds. So I think nowadays, if you want to borrow money, whether it's a loan or a bond, your finance providers, investors or banks, they will ask you many similar questions, whether you are trying to label it as green or blue or whichever color you want.
Yeah, indeed. So thank you for walking us through this. And indeed, the development has been phenomenal, and green bonds nowadays still take the lion's share of what we call the sustainable bonds market. The sustainability bond guidelines and also the social bond principles were developed in 2017. Sustainability bond guidelines being for a mix of green and social. But as you said, since then we've also seen guidance for blue, which is a theme under the principles. Also transition is a theme. And indeed, it's sometimes a bit weird to say a blue bond is really a green bond, or transition can be financed under green. What I always explain is that green shouldn't so much be interpreted as really green, the color green, but it should be seen as environmental. Would you agree with that?
I think that is the way it's generally understood. That's a very generic name. Yeah. So everything goes under it. And then transition is a little bit the hot potato, yeah, where it should belong. But I think green is pretty much understood that it is everything which is environmental, even. Well, social is maybe a different, because that is clearly a different use of proceeds. Mm-hmm. But I think most people understand that it is with the same concept, with the same kind of structure that you need to have.
That's true. But even under social, we have a theme. We have guidelines for gender equality. Yes. So there you go. Yes. Themes, yes, under social as well. Yes.
And of course, green bond, if you don't also respect certain social criteria, it's not good enough. And on social bonds, if you don't respect certain environmental criteria, it's not good enough. So they link very clearly.
Yeah. And then obviously, since then, we've also seen sustainably linked bonds being developed. So that's a bit further than use of proceeds. Those are general purpose bonds. And we've also seen a lot of guidance globally. I mean, you travel the globe going to conferences. expanding the knowledge of people. How has education and capacity building come in developing this market? We talked about the market coming together, but obviously it's important to also bring everyone else in to educate. And part of why this has taken up, I think, is that people understood the market a little bit better.
I think it's hugely important, and we need even more than we have at the moment. I mean, there's just such a demand for it, and you have seen, I think, even in the ICMA organized principals annual general meetings, the number of people that come to those events is just mind-boggling. But also, if you think about the big names like the MDPs, like maybe the large utility companies who have done green bonds, there the knowledge is fairly, deep, and you have resources, you have people to do this. But when you go to the next layer, it's not necessarily the case at all. And these people, for example, municipalities is a good example. Municipalities and cities, they have a lot of work to be done in the decarbonization, and they are responsible for a lot of carbon emissions. And they don't have lots of resources to dedicate to the intricacies of green finance and green bonds or green loans. They need a lot of education and capacity building. I have heard this sort of firsthand from people in that sector, that there's a huge need for it. And I have to say that in that space, even language of the education comes into question. And then also in terms of the corporate world, the next layer, not the very, very large utility companies of the world, but the next layer, I think the same question comes up there. They need to understand. People are very much afraid of doing the wrong thing, that if I'm not quite sure what I do can be labeled green, then I'd rather not label it at all, because I don't want to be accused of, for example, greenwashing. So that need is very deep and very wide in all parts of the world. Even I would say in Europe, where maybe this knowledge is sort of most generally spread. But even here we need a lot more. So yes, this capacity building and education, whether it's in person, whether it's online, in whichever format, we just need more of that, so that people understand how it actually works and what you need to do in order to be able to call it. I think the willingness is there for many.
Yeah, indeed. And ICMA has approached a lot about training requests, and we also have an official education program, of course. And we did capacity building as well with the likes of the IFC. And yes. So I think it continues to be hugely important, because education at the end of the day helps with everything. But I also wanted to talk a little bit more about the development. We've seen the principles being taken up globally. Nowadays, we actually look at this every year, and we've done so for the last couple of years. Nowadays, 97 to 98% of global sustainable bond issuance is aligned to the principles, right? And yes. And I think that is also because we've seen several jurisdictions take up the principles and often adapt them, if not adopt in their own jurisdictions. The most prominent one may be the ASEAN green bond standards and social bond standards and so on. How are you seeing this, and how is it being received globally, you would say? And also, what about emerging markets? You and I worked together on the advisory council that we have as an additional body to the ExCom, focused more on emerging markets. How are they developing their markets, and how are the principles helping?
Well, if I start from the last, so the emerging markets. Well, emerging markets are doing a lot of work. As you can see, there is, for example, some kind of a green bond or green finance principles. Taxonomies are being developed in many parts of the world. We have this going on in Africa, in South America, in Asia. So there's a lot of work being done there. And which I think is good. They are adapting these to their own circumstances, where, for example, compared to Europe or US, where you may have very different situations with the data availability and national standards existing or not, and so on. But the work is there and the willingness is there. Then the principles being the basis for so many global initiatives, to me that's quite natural. First of all, if you look at the names who were behind or who have been behind these green bond and other principles over the years, I think it would be amazing if that would not be taken as a reference, as a basis. I mean, that's if you put together the world's financial markets and then who is who, they are all there. So just that would be enough. But also there has been so much work that went into this over the years. The current principles are not at all what they were in the first place. Well, the core is still there, but they have been developed, they have been expanded, they have been more specified, and so on. So there has been a lot of work that's been put into it by the best experts on the issuer, bank, investor side. And then why would you want to reinvent the wheel, since it seems to be quite a successful model already? So I think what the regulators have been adding is something that we always said at the ExCom of the principle, is that we are not the scientists, we are not deciding what is green or green enough, we leave that to somebody else. And this is what the regulators can say each in their own jurisdiction, what is green or green enough. And I think that is the biggest part that is being added. For example, in Europe, the Green Bond Standard, the structure is really totally based on the Green Bond principles. What they have added is two main things, broadly speaking, is that the use of proceeds should be aligned with taxonomy, which is the definition of what is green, and then they will use a more sort of a prescriptive system for the external reviewers. Otherwise, it is the same structure. And I think all the other jurisdictions are pretty much doing the same to different degrees. And this was the missing part. We always admitted that this is not something that we as finance people are going to say. And I think it also shows in the structure of the green bond market. I'm not talking about green bond because I know that the best, but I think it goes for the others as well, is that most of it has been used to finance infrastructure in solar energy or in wind energy, or then transport like train or, let's say, electrical buses instead of diesel buses in cities, something which can be fairly safely considered green in the absence of clear definitions of what is green. So going forward, when we have more and more on these definitions, I think it would be great to see green bonds which go to circular economy or biodiversity or pollution prevention, things like this, which have not seen much activity. I think in some government green bonds we have seen they are part of the use of proceeds, but nothing which would have been specifically done for these purposes. So hopefully we see also a wider use of proceeds, not that the original ones are not needed more of, but it would be nice to see the diversity.
Yeah, and you just mentioned a lot of things, and I'm glad you brought in the EU Green Bond Standard as well, because indeed this, as you said, is also based on the Green Bond principles, and you were part of the technical expert group, as was the ICMA. And it's really, it's true, there are a lot of topics that we see only now being emphasized more, such as also nature and biodiversity. We also talked about blue, but all of these can really be financed under the Green Bond principles. And also just to say, just a couple of weeks ago, ICMA also launched guidance for green, social and sustainability sukuk. So that's another thing where we're sort of broadening the market or making it available to other parts. So that's really, and we shouldn't forget why we're doing this, right? That's really ultimately to enable the capital flows towards what we need to reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement.
Precisely. Decarbonization and environmental improvement is the thing, not reports.
Exactly. All right. Thank you very much, Eila. It's been a pleasure. And we're going to see each other a lot this year at various conferences. But it's always great talking to you. And let's see where this market will go in the future.
Well, thanks, Simone. It's nice to chat. It's one of my favorite topics as well. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you.